They took my sister on vacation instead of me, then called me begging for help. As I was handing him a glass of soda, Lisa accidentally tripped, sending a sticky cascade of orange juice all over the front of my dress. She burst into a fit of laughter, pointing at the dark, spreading stain. I was mortified, forced to change while she entertained my guest. And by entertained, I mean she systematically humiliated me, regaling Mark with a curated collection of my most embarrassing childhood stories. She stayed for the entire movie, a smug third wheel, interjecting with loud comments and ensuring Mark and I couldn't exchange more than a few words. As he was leaving, his discomfort palpable, Lisa delivered the final, crushing blow. She smirked at him and said, "You know, you could do so much better than her." He practically fled from her house. I tried, repeatedly, to show my parents the truth. I would present them with clear evidence of her manipulations, her casual cruelty. But they were willfully blind. They would chalk it up to her being young and naive, or accuse me of being jealous of my miracle sister. I was the troublemaker, the one who couldn't just get along. So, I stopped trying. I retreated into my studies, focusing on the one area of my life where my efforts were rewarded, where success was determined by merit, not by my mother's fickle affections. College was my escape. It was a chance to build an identity for myself outside the suffocating shadow of my sister. I moved out, created a new life, and thrived. But the breaks I spent at home were a constant, painful reminder of my status as an outsider. Lisa, now a teenager, made it abundantly clear that my presence was an unwelcome intrusion. She would give me the silent treatment, her disdain a palpable force field. If I dared to speak at the dinner table, she would either interrupt me or simply get up and leave. She would borrow my belongings, only for them to turn up broken or mysteriously lost. My parents' only response was a weary sigh and a plea for us to try and get along. The emotional toll became too much. I started making excuses, spending my breaks with friends, immersing myself in their warm, normal families. My parents didn't seem to mind. They saw it as a sign of my independence, never questioning the real reason I was avoiding my own home. While I was away, building a career at a multinational corporation in San Francisco, Lisa's life remained comfortably stagnant. She didn't have the grades for a 4-year university, so she enrolled in the local community college, a decision that conveniently allowed her to remain at home, firmly ensconced in the warm, enabling glow of our parents' adoration. I maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship with my parents, our conversations carefully curated to avoid the landmine that was Lisa. With her, I had no contact at all. Then, a few months ago, our fractured family was rocked by a crisis. My father suffered a near-fatal heart attack. He survived, by some miracle, but the event was a brutal wake-up call. I flew home immediately, taking advantage of my job's remote work policy. The hospital was a blur of beeping machines and hushed conversations with doctors. My father, looking frail and smaller than I had ever seen him, spoke of his brush with death, of his regret for not spending more time with us, his daughters. He wanted to reconnect, to make up for lost time. I knew what he was asking. He wanted a family vacation, a chance for us to be a family again. Despite my deep reservations, despite the gnawing anxiety at the thought of being trapped in close quarters with Lisa, I couldn't say no. Not to him. Not now. Lisa, predictably, was less than thrilled, but she couldn't very well refuse our father's post-heart attack wish. The planning began. My father, with a renewed vigor for life, booked flights and accommodations for a week-long trip to a tropical resort. I took the time off work, determined to make the best of it for his sake. But the moment we arrived at the airport, I knew my cautious optimism had been a fool's errand. My ticket had been canceled. My father was adamant he had booked and paid for all 4. But a check with the airline confirmed it. The ticket under my name, and only my name, had been mysteriously canceled online the night before. I looked over at Lisa. She was staring at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. It was the same look she'd had after the spider, after Mark, after every single one of her small, cruel victories. She had done this. She had logged into my father's email, found the confirmation, and surgically removed me from our family vacation. I confronted her, my voice rising with a furious, incredulous rage. I turned to my parents, pointing out the smug satisfaction on her face. But they couldn't see it. "Your sister would never do something like that," my mother said, her voice a familiar chorus of dismissal. My father suggested it was an airline error. They simply would not, believe their miracle child was capable of such a calculated act of sabotage. There was nothing I could do. The flight was boarding. There were no other flights that day. I could, in theory, book a new flight for the following day, but the thought of traveling alone to join them, of being the unwanted guest, of having to share a room with the sister who had just so brazenly tried to erase me, was more than I could bear. My father, to his credit, looked genuinely conflicted. He suggested they all go home, that we reschedule. But my mother quickly chimed in, reminding him how long it had been since they'd had a real vacation, how much he needed this to de-stress after his health scare. "And you travel all the time for work," she said, turning to me, her words a casual dismissal of my feelings. "You won't be missing much." It was a gut punch. It was clear they were looking for my permission, for my blessing to leave me behind. And so, I gave it to them. "Go," I said, my voice hollow. "Don't let the money go to waste." They readily agreed, a little too quickly, their relief palpable. I stood there, a solitary figure in the bustling airport, and watched my family, my parents and their real daughter, walk away from me, heading toward their much-needed vacation. I didn't go back to their empty house. I flew back to my own life, to my apartment in San Francisco, to the quiet solitude that had become my refuge. A few days into their trip, I woke up to a flurry of missed calls from my mother. My first thought, a cold spike of panic, was that something had happened to my dad. I called her back immediately. She was hysterical, but not for the reason I had feared. It was Lisa. My father's essential, life-saving heart medications had started disappearing. One pill, then two, then an entire day's dose. They were in a foreign country, unsure if they could get a new prescription. My father's health, still so fragile, was in jeopardy. They had torn their hotel room apart, searching in vain. Finally, in a moment of desperation, my mother had gone into Lisa's adjoining room while she was out. And there, tucked away in Lisa's bedside table, were the missing pills. It was a chilling, undeniable discovery. Their beloved daughter, their miracle child, had been intentionally, systematically, stealing our father's medication, putting his life at grave risk. My mother, her voice quivering with a mixture of horror and disbelief, asked me what they should do. I urged her to stay calm, to not confront Lisa until they were safely back home. I knew my sister. A confrontation would only lead to more lies, more manipulation, a dramatic scene that would solve nothing. But my parents, finally faced with the undeniable proof of their daughter's malevolence, couldn't wait. The confrontation that night was explosive. I got the full, chaotic story from my father in a late-night phone call, his voice trembling with a rage and grief I had never heard before. When they asked her about the medications, Lisa had unleashed a torrent of fury. Her rage was directed primarily at our father, accusing him of betraying her by inviting me on their family vacation. She screamed that if they continued to have a relationship with me, she would teach them a lesson they would never forget. Her tantrum escalated, objects were thrown, insults were hurled, until the hotel staff, alerted by the commotion, called the local authorities. Lisa, in her rage, had apparently insulted the officers, a move that landed her in a holding cell for the night. The next morning, desperate to escape this vacation-turned-nightmare, my parents prepared to reschedule their flight home. That's when they discovered their passports and wallets were missing. Lisa, it seemed, had either hidden them or thrown them away. They were stranded, penniless and documentless, in a foreign country, their fate in the hands of the daughter who had just tried to poison their father. It was in that moment of pure, unadulterated crisis that my parents finally, completely, saw the truth. My mother, the woman who had spent 2 decades defending her miracle child, was now on the phone with me, begging for help, her voice broken by the weight of her own shattered denial. Her angelic daughter was a monster, and she had no one to blame but herself. The journey to get my parents home was a logistical nightmare. I wired them money via Western Union so they could eat and get a taxi to the embassy. The process of getting emergency travel documents was slow and arduous, fraught with bureaucracy and language barriers. For a week, they were trapped in that hotel, a week they spent in a state of shocked, silent grief, forced to share a space with the daughter who had revealed her true, terrifying nature. Lisa, after her release, was sullen and unrepentant. She refused to tell them where the passports were, enjoying her newfound power over them. It wasn't until my father, his voice a low, dangerous calm, threatened to report the theft to the embassy and have her charged with a felony, that she finally relented, revealing she had buried them in a planter outside the hotel lobby. They returned home, not refreshed and reconnected, but broken and utterly defeated. The first thing they did was tell Lisa to pack her bags and get out. This, of course, triggered another epic confrontation. Lisa unleashed a torrent of accusations, claiming they had pushed her to this, that her actions were a desperate cry for the undivided attention she felt she was owed. She threatened to go to the police, to tell the world they had neglected and mistreated her, to ruin their pristine reputations as respected doctors in our community. For weeks, they lived in a state of hostage, trapped in their own home with a daughter who had become their tormentor. She would blast music at all hours, hide their car keys, and break things in fits of rage. The final straw came one night when, during an argument, she lunged at our father with a kitchen knife. My mother, her hand shaking, finally called the police. This time, there were no excuses, no miracle child to protect. Lisa was arrested and charged with assault. With her in custody, my parents, guided by a lawyer, began the formal eviction process. They bailed her out and served her with the papers, a final, legal severing. It was a heartbreaking, ugly end to a lifetime of enabling. During this tumultuous period, my parents flew out to San Francisco to stay with me. It was a visit born of desperation, a retreat from the war zone their home had become. In the quiet of my apartment, away from the chaos, the walls they had built around their grief and denial finally came crumbling down. They sat at my dining table, their faces etched with a humility and regret I had never seen before, and they apologized. They apologized for the years of blindness, for the casual cruelty of their favoritism, for never listening to me, for never protecting me. My father, his voice thick with emotion, admitted they had been so consumed by their own past trauma that they had turned Lisa into a symbol, not a person, and in doing so, had failed us both. My mother, her tears flowing freely for the first time in my memory, acknowledged the profound pain they had caused, the isolation I had felt in my own family. I listened, and as I did, I shared my own story, the litany of small and large betrayals I had endured in silence for so long. They listened, truly listened for the first time, their faces a canvas of shock and dawning horror. It was a raw, painful, and profoundly necessary conversation, a lancing of a wound that had been festering for 2 decades. I told them that forgiveness would not be easy, that trust, once so thoroughly broken, would take a long time to rebuild. But for the first time in years, we were a family, not in facade, but in a shared, messy, and honest truth. Lisa, after being formally evicted, is now staying with a friend. My parents, on my advice, are planning to meet with her in a public place, to open a dialogue not of reconciliation, but of consequence. They are insisting she get a mental health evaluation, a condition for any future financial or emotional support. I have chosen to remain distant from that process. My own healing requires a boundary that I am no longer willing to compromise. My parents are back home now, and our phone calls are different. They are filled with a new kind of honesty, a tentative rebuilding of a bridge I had long thought was burned to ashes. The road ahead is long and uncertain, but for the first time, I feel a glimmer of hope. The monster has been named, the truth has been spoken, and in the quiet aftermath, we are finally, slowly, beginning to find our way back to each other.